Our third and final session of today is entitled Education and Pedagogy. As noted in the session on ecology, one hard-hit institution in the era of COVID were schools. To maintain social distancing and reduce the spread of COVID-19, schools from elementary to higher education closed and or shifted almost overnight to remote instruction. Although online learning is nothing new, this sudden and nearly universal shift to remote learning required wholesale rethinking of pedagogical norms, and in so doing put issues of equity and access into stark relief and changed the experience and delivery of both teaching and learning while introducing new opportunities for collaboration. The presentations today will share stories of innovation and also offer cautionary tales about long-term impacts on educational outcomes as inequities, accessibility, lack of adequate resources, and significant stressors enter the at-home or eventually in-person classrooms. These questions in mind, papers in this category will explore the impact of pandemics on higher education, especially in the fields related to the built environment, how the pandemic has affected architecture and urban design curriculum in the short and long terms, both opportunities and challenges of remote teaching in the COVID era, and the ways in which COVID-19 has impacted the educational experience for students. Likely, parts of online teaching practices will remain with us in ways good and challenging into the future. The presentations in this session urge us to consider how this technological shift might be leveraged toward greater equity, accessibility, and in the case of architectural design studios, the focus of this session leveraged to envision meaningful design interventions for a post-COVID world. Dr. Ashraf Salama will be moderating this session. Dr. Salama is Professor of Architecture and Director of Research at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. He has led 3 schools of architecture in Egypt, Qatar, and the United Kingdom, 2 of which he has founded. Having authored and co-edited 14 books and published over 170 articles and chapters in the International Refereed Press, he is the chief editor of ArcNet IJAR and co-chief editor of Open House International. Professor Salama is the recipient of the 2017 UIA Schumi Prize for Excellence in Architectural Education and Criticism.
Thank you very much, Mohammed and Kathleen, for this important event and this introduction. Its diversity and plurality, and for really the excellent design and planning of the topics and the sessions. In this session on pedagogy, we have 5 contributions from 4 countries: United States, Philippines, Serbia, and United Arab Emirates, addressing pedagogy on pedagogical issues that have universal applicability in the context of this pandemic, in architecture planning and interior design, and really addressing timely and critical issues relevant to education of future built environment professionals. The first presentation is in the context of the Great Plains in America, and it's by Bud Schoenfeld, who's an assistant professor of architecture, and the Mel Trula Bachman Professor in Healthcare Design at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He received his Master of Architecture degree from Louisiana State University, and his research is focused on healthy placemaking for rural resilience, as well as the study and practice of beginning design pedagogy.
Teaching a beginning design studio to students for 8 weeks over the summer has its challenges in a typical year. I'm here today to discuss an atypical year, one full of unimaginable challenges, but one that I will argue opens new opportunities for equitable design education in rural and frontier locations. Nebraska's capital city, Lincoln, is not considered rural by most measures. However, the students that attend the University of Nebraska are often from rural and frontier communities across the Great Plains. The challenges and pedagogical adaptations required to successfully teach a summer design studio during COVID-19 isolation provides a post-COVID model for education equity in rural and frontier communities. The focus of the design studio is on making within the design process as a means of developing ideas, with concentrated learning outcomes on physical and digital modeling, freehand drawing, orthographic projection, and other forms of graphic representation. I would like to add that the successful outcomes of this studio were made possible through a collaboration with UNL instructor Nolan Golgert and graduate teaching assistant Ashley Glessinger. With 1/3 of our students being from rural communities, it was important to adapt the studio expectations to the realities of rural isolation. For students in remote locations, obtaining art supplies for a project might require driving to a store an hour and a half to 2 hours away. Additionally, the project expectations had to be mindful of the new working conditions facing the students. Students might be working at a dining room table or on the floor or even in a room with a sick parent. The approach was to start the semester with materials that could be acquired from any location. For example, graphic packaging, cardboard, colored cardstock, etc. It was also important to scale back the size of the project deliverables to accommodate constrained working conditions. Additionally, an undergraduate assistant helped develop a series of videos the students could reference as needed. In the Toolbox video, she shares common design studio tools, how to use them, and alternative options that might be more cost-effective or more easily attainable in rural locations. For students, the design studio is where work is shared with peers and instructors, and new ideas are developed and evaluated. The design studio is the cornerstone of design education. As an alternative to the studio, we explored different online options, but in the end, the best solution was one that all students were familiar and comfortable with: social media. This platform is used by the studio to share and critique proposed solutions to design problems. It required that students not only post images to Instagram, but also share their intent by writing short summaries of the work, developing a skill atypical to design studios. Another advantageous outcome of the Instagram platform was anonymity. We all shared and posted work to the studio account, which required one name and one password. Project postings were not linked to student names. This allowed the class to have in-depth conversations on the merit of the work itself without any associations to its creator. Additionally, by grading the work prior to our studio conversations, the students were guaranteed a fair and unbiased evaluation of the proposed solution to the design project. Lastly, Instagram became a very useful tool for discussing and evaluating the successes or shortcomings of a given solution. In this example, we use Zoom tools to identify primary and secondary compositional elements from the students' selected artwork. And then, by taking advantage of Instagram's platform, which stacks images sequentially, we are able to discuss the successes or shortcomings of that student's compositional response to the image. So here you see lines being overlaid on a selected image by the student. And then we're able to take that and overlay it on top of the compositions that were put together by the student to evaluate shortcomings as well as successes within those compositions. The final project of the summer studio is to propose a design intervention on an actual site in Lincoln. Rather than let COVID-19 deprive the students of this design opportunity, several instructors worked with the director of photography for university communications to use drone technology to capture the site. As a result of not having to photograph and visit the entire site, the students spent more time on research rather than assuming they knew the place by visiting it. This also allowed all students equal access to the assigned site. Expanding the experience. The impact of COVID-19 forced design instructors to reevaluate how a design studio could be taught online. but it also provided a unique opportunity to rethink how a beginning design studio should be taught. The studio is no longer confined to a physical space. Expanding the experience engages the students and exposes the beginning design student to experiences outside of preconceived expectations. COVID isolation expanded our access to opportunities and information that was previously outside of our reach, especially in rural America. For example, the Friday before classes started, I invited my students to join me in Los Angeles for a lecture by the prominent architect and educator Mark Foster Gage. This was obviously done virtually and not in person. Also, in an effort to fight Zoom fatigue and at the same time expand the studio experience, we started the mornings with music and analysis and complemented the mid-morning discussions with relevant short films or performances. Lastly, and one of my favorite outcomes of COVID-19 is trading time with fellow design educators at other institutions, nationally or internationally, and exposing students to diverse design perspectives and methodological approaches. I wanted to end with this slide. Behind each of these backgrounds is a student. What you see is their proposal for a given project. In this environment, we work very hard. We provide each other critical feedback, and the success of the individual students relies on the contributions of everyone involved. Educational equity suggests unimpeded access to education and the removal of barriers standing in the way of student success. The Summer Studio's response to COVID-19 was to focus on equity of education, include students in the process, and approach the challenge as a design problem. The outcomes of this studio reflect not only a successful response to the pandemic, but provides a framework for equitable design education. Thank you for your time.
Okay, and the second presentation in the context of the Philippines and with a collaborator from Australia too, we have a number of co-presenters and contributors for this presentation about implications for place-making pedagogy. Richard Caraga is an assistant professor of management at the University of the Philippines, Visayas, at Tacloban City, Philippines. Shirley Maraya is a faculty member in the Division of Management at the University of the Philippines, Visayas also. Maria Sescan is a management faculty at the University of the Philippines, Visayas. And we have also Dr. Adelina Mateo Babiano, is a senior lecturer in urban planning at the University of Melbourne, and she's part of the award-winning Place agency. So please start.
In this presentation, we used the implementation of the placemaking course as a case study to explore the impact of the pandemic on remote teaching and how it has impacted the educational experience of professional development students in the Philippines. The Philippines is an archipelagic country with 7,107 islands. One of its administrative regions is the Eastern Visayas, which consists of 6 provinces, 1 independent city, and 1 highly urbanized city, its capital, Tacloban City. As of 2015, it has a population of 4.4 million. To respond to the paucity of learning opportunities in urban planning, the first ever professional development training course on public space management aimed to teach placemaking theory and practice was implemented by the University of the Philippines academics, inspired by the Placemaking Sandbox project of the Place Agency. This teaching pedagogy included the hosting of a 24-hour synchronous lectures and focus group discussions done in 8 sessions, provision of a learning management system that was made available for 45 days where uploaded learning resources and materials can be accessed anytime. Discussion fora were set up to facilitate interaction, journal reflections, and case studies as assessment tools were rolled out. This made the 40 participants spread throughout the islands of Leyte and Samar participate remotely and safely at the convenience of their home or local workspaces. and also address the varied and individual gadget and internet connectivity challenges, still gaining the professional education and learnings at par to the traditional face-to-face training setup.
Student respondents were asked to define placemaking and the purpose of placemaking using the 5P: people, process, product, program, and place evaluation placemaking framework as a tool to analyze the responses. Pre-survey results revealed that students perceived placemaking as focusing mostly on the product aspect of placemaking. The first word cloud shows that placemaking is mostly understood in the context of a physically built environment, development interventions in spatial in nature, tangible and visible infrastructures. The second word cloud shows its purpose as a process of creating better public spaces. As one respondent states, it is the shaping of underutilized spaces to be more usable, livable, and beautiful. There is a bias towards addressing and satisfying the immediate needs of the people and the community and mostly mixed up with ideas of place masking and place washing. Placemaking is understood as creating places that are not only aimed at social and human development, but also the natural environment. We all know that connection to our ecosystems, the trees, animals, wind, water, and sun is critical to our well-being.
To evaluate their learning, students were asked to self-report on their growth based on the head, heart, and hand pedagogical model. The Triple H model represents a way to simultaneously engage our cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains of learning to achieve a holistic education. While this model has been successfully applied to topics such as eco-literacy and sustainability through the Placemaking Sandbox project, this has been used to evaluate pedagogical approach to placemaking in tertiary institutions. The post survey showed students self reporting an increased understanding of the 5P, while also confirmed a high level of head, heart, hand dimensions of transformative learning through the online delivery, with average responses as head 6.5 out of the highest possible value of 7, heart 6.39, and hand 6.17. The low rating in the hand dimension validates the effect of non face to face or online delivery. Hence, while the pandemic restricted teaching and learning activities that would elicit better student learning outcomes if face to face meetings, hands on training, and community engagement were made possible, it also opened opportunities to test alternative curriculum design and online delivery platforms, enabling empirical observations and the collection of pre and post student perception surveys of their learnings.
So the key challenge of the placemaking training program was delivering an alternative online subject delivery format for a place-based subject purposely designed for face-to-face. Whilst internet connectivity was an issue experienced by some participants, limiting their participation in the twice weekly synchronous meetings, participants still valued their overall learning. Although physical meetings did not happen, the online Zoom platform still allowed the creation of a digital community of learners with a common goal of advancing their built environment knowledge, demonstrating that it is still possible to create a community of learners, whether online or face to face. Participants self reported overall growth in placemaking knowledge and skills. The Triple H results showed different knowledge and skills were enhanced, slightly higher on heart and head skills, and slightly lower on the hand or practical skills. Participants initially understood placemaking based on its physical dimension, but in the end, they understood its multidimensionality. In summary, they understood that the purpose of placemaking is about creating meaningful relationships. Thank you.
In this
Okay, we have the following presentation, which is really very interesting, and it takes us from the context of the Philippines to the West Balkan countries and the University of Belgrade, Serbia. So our contributors are diverse in this one, and there are 9 people, 9 architects, practicing architects and researchers. The presentation will be presented by Milos Kostic, but a brief collective biography here that the work is based on the experiences of the group of 9 teaching and research assistants who initiated an organized online workshop during the COVID-19 pandemic last April at the University of Belgrade Faculty of Architecture. They are engaged in working in 3 different departments at the Faculty of Architecture. And these departments are architecture, urbanism, and architecture technology. And they gathered professionally for the purpose of this initiative, the workshop.
Good afternoon. My name is Milos Kostic, and it is my pleasure to present you the research entitled An Online Student Workshop as a Pedagogical Experiment Necessitated by COVID-19 in Serbia. The presentation will showcase a pedagogical experiment conducted in the form of an extracurricular student online workshop, COVID-19 Challenges, Architecture of Pandemic, organized during the pandemic lockdown in April 2020 by the University of Belgrade Faculty of Architecture, Serbia. The research is based on the experiences of 9 teaching and research assistants aged from 27 to 35 years who initiated an organized online workshop. They are employed in 3 different departments: architecture, urbanism, and architectural technology, and they gathered professionally for the purpose of this initiative. Throughout history, the global society faced various crises which had negative consequences for society. However, the specificity of the current COVID-19 crisis is manifested in a much shorter time frame, which makes the consequences immediately visible. Therefore, a rapid response regarding professional action is needed to reduce the risk of spreading the virus. On the other hand, such specific crises, which can often be unpredictable, show an adequate spatial programming framework for the prevention and suppression of the pandemic spread or mitigation of its consequences. Additionally, living and studying in a time of pandemics created a situation in which students are both witnesses and agents of change. This situation emphasized the need to make a greater effort in order to cope with the given challenges in a sustainable manner. The cause for workshop initiation was found in professional responsibility, intention to contribute to the overall critical debate on how cities should function, and the will to continue the faculty endeavor to provide a range of extracurricular activities due to recognized importance in architectural education. The online workshop was organized in April 2020. During this time, Serbia was in complete lockdown, transferring all teaching activities to online learning environment. The workshop was focused on the search for new, innovative typologies and architectural scenarios that will enable the daily activities to be carried out safely and effectively, even in a time of pandemic. The workshop was organized into 4 phases. The initial phase was held as an introductory presentation in which tutors presented the topic and expected workshop results. In the second phase, students presented the initial scope of an action through Pecha Kucha presentations. Based on the complementarity of certain aspects, the spatial level of activity, and the programmatic orientation, the students were divided into 6 thematic fields within which further work continued. The main focus of the third and the most dynamic phase was the development of conceptual designs and studies through open discussions between students, tutors, and critics in all 6 thematic frameworks. Each day was divided into 2 sessions. In the first session, 3 tutors were assigned to work with students according to the thematic frameworks. The second session consisted of an overview of students' work at the given moment, followed by a discussion with critics. During the fourth phase, students worked independently to finalize their conceptual designs based on feedback from the daily reviews, and in following days, the tutors prepared a bilingual ebook in which the research perspectives, thematic frameworks, student works, comments, and reflections of the critics were explained. In order to present results of the workshop to the wider community, an online exhibition was organized. In workshop assessment and dissemination phase of the research, the results of the workshop were systematized in the form of 29 design proposals grouped into 6 thematic frameworks. The first one was improvement of functional performance of space. aimed to explore the opportunities for enhancing communication, establishing safe spatial distances, and to improve delivery and transportation mechanisms. This framework also included critical thinking of the modules and standards in housing design. The second one is alternative modes of space use. The thematic framework represented rethinking and reorganizing of spaces of collective everyday activities and gatherings, such as trade facilities and open market systems, and reuse of distinct open public spaces in the time of emergency. Urban equipment and public spaces. Projects within this framework suggested mapping and adapting underused spaces for the better quality of leisure activities, outdoor work, living space, as well as rethinking the design of open public space and its elements concerning security barriers. The fourth one, design of protective equipment, prototypes, consisted of ideas that are primarily related to the creation of prototypes and patents of protective gear that can be used during the pandemic. That included the design of different spatial barriers, protective masks, pneumatic structures used for protection purposes, but also the design of different everyday things that can be carried as corona kit or disinfection equipment. The next one is altered everyday life, proposing ideas of reconsidering relations between outdoor and indoor spaces within spatial restrictions caused by the pandemic situation and the establishment of new normality. The designs explore the possibilities of supplementing everyday living spaces and functions with elements of nature, open space, or space for hobbies. The final framework deals with accommodation models for the most vulnerable groups and consists of projects that explore possibilities of improving the space for the most endangered groups of people, elderly and infected, and finding new spatial capacities for accommodation within both urban and rural environment. The later implication can be recognized on two levels. The first level is reflected in the professional contribution in the architecture of pandemics. It encouraged and empowered students to seek the answers to COVID-19 challenges, both in process and problem-oriented manner. The disciplinary framework of architecture and urbanism was once again illuminated as a symbiosis of technical, technological, and socio-humanistic and artistic aspects. The second level of contribution is reflected in developing new methodological framework of online learning applicable to various teaching and extracurricular activities in the future. Based on our results, future research should focus on enabling active experimentation in times of pandemics, thus closing the cycle of experiential learning. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we have now our fourth presentation, which is in the context of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, and it outlines a pedagogical experience in response to the COVID-19 as a teaching experiment and as well as a survey that tries to measure student reactions to that experiment. So we have two contributors to this work. Dr. Ahmed Sukkar is a visiting assistant professor at the University of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, currently shortlisted for the Mohammed Makaya Prize, Middle Eastern Architecture Personality of the Year. He completed his PhD in Architecture Humanities from the University of London and was a scholar in a number of universities and visiting fellow in MIT and Cambridge and Oxford University. And we have Dr. Ahmad Mushtaha, who is an associate professor at the University of Sharjah. He obtained his PhD in the field of urban and environmental engineering from Hokkaido University, Japan, and published more than 40 articles in architecture and urban management, housing, sustainability. He is an active research member in the Sustainable Engineering Asset Management research group at the University of Sharjah.
Our ongoing research attempts to resituate the current debate between architectural educators around the world, including the Arab region, who see the challenge of remote teaching in the COVID era as opportunities to check the sacredness of traditional design studio culture, and other architectural educators who fear that this challenge could eliminate this culture in the long term. exploring theoretical and practical aspects of these opportunities and the challenges of remote teaching during the pandemic. It examines how COVID-19 has impacted the learning experience of architectural students and the teaching practice of their instructors at the University of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates. The case study focuses on architectural design studio of 16 students at the Architectural Engineering Department, shared between two PhD holder instructors supervising fourth-year students groups during fall 2020 in one of 5 studios, each being shared between two instructors. The two instructors, who have distinct theoretical and practical background, also teach theoretical courses and serve on final juries at other colleges and universities in the Arab region. The students have worked simultaneously for 2 submissions, one to the department and the other to a competition entitled Haptic, organized by the world's leading platform for global architectural competitions, UNI. Paradoxically, at the time when touching is discouraged, the design brief has focused on tactile and materiality in architecture as elements of construction and aesthetics to design a museum of material in a site in Barcelona, Spain. The virtual design teaching was conducted using MS Teams. The virtual teaching included online digital sketching on digital models placed on Google Maps with extensive references to examples of projects on the internet. We have conducted a questionnaire of 50 questions divided into 3 sections to survey the perspectives of our students about online teaching and learning. The first section focuses on their current view on key parameters of the impact of online education on studio teaching and learning. The second section focuses on their futuristic perspectives on the same parameters. The third section includes a concluding statement and an open question. The parameters were communication, motivation, creativity, productivity, learning experience, effectiveness of time, flexibility, and well-being and health. The findings about Teaching Studio in the COVID-19 age include the following summary. The student rank communication, creativity, productivity, learning experience, and the effectiveness of time and flexibility positively. They rank well-being and health negatively. Their futuristic perspectives on the same parameters match their current view. Most students agreed that design studio culture has changed form, but has neither been lost nor been shaken. Online teaching became less challenging throughout the course. The students are divided almost equally in their preference for hybrid teaching. Most students think that online teaching will not undermine the roles of instructors in the learning process in the long term. Thank you.
Our final presentation in this session basically addresses interior design in the context of California State University, Northridge, and in an interior design program, and try to look at the effectiveness of virtual learning in the context of the pandemic. We have two contributors. Hussam Gamari is an assistant professor in the interior design program at the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences, California State University, Northridge. He has an over 10 years experience in research, practice, and teaching in interior design and architecture. He obtained his PhD with a focus on wayfinding in unfamiliar environments. We have Nasreen Golshani, second contributor, is a PhD student at the Department of Architecture, University of Oregon. She also serves as a graduate researcher at the High Performance Environments Lab. Her research work focuses on understanding the relationship between the built environment and health outcomes.
Good morning. I would like to thank the Epidemic Urbanism Symposium to provide this opportunity to present the findings of this study on investigating the effectiveness of virtual learning in design studios in Los Angeles, United States. So this study focuses on interior design studios as places that interior design students have interactions with each other and with their instructors to learn their design projects. Students spend hours of time to develop their design ideas and present those ideas. As we know, COVID-19 has significantly impacted learning, and particularly it has been severe changes in design studios, and that has generated serious problems and challenges for those students. So in this study, we are curious to know what changes have been done and what are the positive and negative outcomes of virtual learning in design studios. The objective of this study was to identify the major challenges of architecture and design education in pandemic world and assess the degree to which virtual teaching platforms have been effective to address those challenges. For this study, we used online survey and interview with the students and their instructors, and we had 47 undergraduate interior design students participated in the online survey as well as the interviews. And all the students were freshmen that they were working on designing an educational facility for their project. After collecting the data, we conducted content analysis for the interviews. And the data has been mainly collected from California State University from interior design studios. And since this is an ongoing research project and we are in the process of analyzing the data, we would be delighted to share the findings of this study in future. But for today, I'm going to focus on some main aspects of the findings of this study. So the results of this study show that there is a significant negative impact of virtual learning on collaboration and communication between the students and their instructors. So the results and responses from students indicated that collaboration has been negatively impacted due to the restrictions that the students found in virtual learning. And also there is less communication between students in the virtual classrooms for design studios. Also, we focused on the design process and its component as part of the learning outcome of these classrooms. So what we found was model making as one of the major components for freshman students to experiment different forms and learn craftsmanship has been negatively impacted as well. And the reason is there is less time and control on having demonstration in virtual classroom for making and construction. Also, site visit of the project is an important and essential component of the design process for interior design students, and that has been also significantly restricted in virtual learning. Interestingly, we found that the students showed more satisfaction in virtual learning of these design studios compared to in-person meetings. And the findings show that the students were more satisfied because they found more time and more engagement with their instructors to share their projects and ask for feedback. Also, in terms of pinup and presentation, what we found was the students were more satisfied and they preferred virtual learning over in person. And that's an interesting finding as well, because the findings showed that the students were more engaged and they were delighted to see other students' projects at the same time in virtual platforms. Overall, we found that learning outcome has been impacted and there are positive and negative points that should be investigated and addressed to make the virtual learning more effective and efficient. To conclude, this study focused on interior design studios and positive and negative impacts of COVID-19. There are four major areas that this study touched on that can be used to provide implications and recommendations for future studies, as well as finding teaching strategies in virtual classrooms. The first one is about global approach and design pedagogy. So what we found in this study was students were more satisfied with virtual learning because instructors, they had a global approach and they invited instructors all around the world to be part of the pinup and critic. And that can be used as one of the strategy to help the students to receive feedback and basically review their projects from multiple perspectives. And that can be followed by multidisciplinary critic and mentorship. And for interior design students, that's an important part of their learning to have a multidisciplinary critic and mentorship for their project. So virtual learning can involve people from other disciplines, as virtual platforms can help them to communicate better within the design studios. Also, what we found was, as I mentioned earlier, engaging students and collaborating between students has been a major challenge in virtual classrooms. So instructors and people involved in design studios are encouraged to use innovative pedagogical strategies to engage students in virtual classrooms. In addition to that, we would like to encourage instructors to focus more on making and demonstrations in the classroom, as that has been significantly restricted by virtual learning in design studios. Thank you very much for paying attention to this presentation.
Thank you very much. I would say I just want to start by thanking all the presenters for, number one, their commitment to shape and rethink their practices in the context of this condition, to the delivery experiences they have gone through, and to reflect on the implications of the situation we find ourselves in. And of course, on their students' responses. I have a couple of comments first, and then we'll see the course of the event of the rest of the remaining 15 minutes. The presentations collectively demonstrate two important things. Architecture education is passing through or experiencing a transitional emergency model that demonstrates the adaptation, mitigation to cope with this unprecedented situation, and potentially this may result in entirely reshaping a model that we have experienced for 200 years, that was a dominant model for 200 years. The presentations also demonstrate a fascinating range of initiatives, and collectively they teach us and tell us much in terms of the reimagining of architecture pedagogy and the integration of and mainstreaming of technology. They manifest an opportunity to bring research on pedagogy, normally occupying a marginalized position within academia, to the forefront of discussions on architecture education and the education of future architects. There is a couple of questions here, and let me start by, there was one question from a previous session, and that's important, and it's for all the contributors here. And I would say it's about digital platforms and how digital platforms are generic, and do we, whether we need to have a custom-based digital platform for teaching design and teaching architecture design, interior design, design of all forms. So I would really open this for discussion to the presenters, and perhaps we can start by Bud, the first presenter, if possible.
Yes, that's a great question. I think, as you saw in my presentation, I guess I would challenge some of that notion, because for me, I found that the students wanted to be in a platform that they were comfortable with. And so it was really about trying to adapt platforms that they were used to in ways that could be innovative in new ways. And even, and maybe this is going off a little bit from the question, but for me, like, so I taught beginning design students. Most of my students were 19, 20 years old, and they had no real kind of studio experience, which was another reason for introducing using the tools that they were familiar with. But the complaints came that, what about the studio experience? Like, what about like getting together in a classroom and everything else? And so I practiced for 15 years, actually longer than that, probably 17 to 18 years before I started teaching. And I told them that my first 5 years, I never visited the site that I was designing projects for. Now, we could argue that isn't a good idea, but it's the reality of the industry. So being able to kind of adapt to platforms that are already there and that are familiar with people across continents and everything else, I think that's important. So I would, although I think it's interesting, I would say that there's a lot of value in kind of being innovative with the tools that people are comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Comments from other colleagues who have experimented really with digital platforms and found difficulties basically in adapting these platforms. So maybe the presentation from Sharjah, Ahmed, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Salama, for the very good question, because actually this is at the heart of the problem, at least in our studio, that, for example, students in the past used to work together in the same space, sometimes on the same computer, or at least to pass files between each other easily, or at least be in using the same Wi-Fi. So they were able actually to work together, but because of them working far from each other in different cities and even in different countries, so they were not able to work together on the same models. And many of them, I would not say complaining, but kind of expressing ideas or expressing their feeling that what they, in the past, what they have used to do in like 2 hours, they now need 6 hours to complete. And this is one of the main challenges of technology. I think over time it would be resolved by through the BIM technology and developing such kind of things. But I mean, having said all of that, I think that it has many advantages that we know in architecture, challenges sometimes create or open doors for creativity. I can talk a lot about that, but I guess this is a summary of the situation.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Milos, also from the perspective of Belgrade, I'm familiar with the school and the activities of the school and visited your school a couple of times. So it would be good to get your insight on the digital platform adaptation or custom-based one, please.
Yes, thank you first for the great symposium and for discussing all these interesting topics. I would like to add to these previous points that, for example, I think that this type of rigid structures that were bound to these traditional pedagogy models were not, has shown during this pandemic to not be very appropriate for transferring them one-to-one into a digital environment. because of it, these new platforms such as Zoom platform or Microsoft Teams offered constant development of the new tools and new plugins, which enabled us to work with different groups of students from different levels, which are located in different countries, as already mentioned, or in different cities at the same time. And challenging these traditional models of design studios, which are usually organized in one space where the groups are divided and people need to work among themselves and to find the solutions. These new platforms enabled creation of different rooms and different virtual spaces, like separate classrooms, which enabled continual work with tutors, with mentors, with critics. That was very useful for organizing a workshop that we were talking about today, because we had, for example, a large number of students. It was almost 100 students working at the same time with a small group of mentors, and this enabled different transitions between these chat rooms and between these digital classrooms, which gave a huge contribution to each project.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to other questions, and also other speakers would have an opportunity to respond to. There is a question about the impact of COVID-19 on the production of knowledge and the attitude of the students on the group work. It's basically double questions about the production of knowledge, one, and about the impact on the idea of group work. So probably the speakers, the team from the Philippines would give us, because basically it's beyond the typical or the mainstream studio work, the class you are teaching, which is interesting. So would be good to hear your perspective also.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions and also for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Durley. And yeah, so for the question in terms of production of knowledge, I think it was interesting that we had the framework or the tool to self-report on, you know, the knowledge gained as well as the skills gained, right? So from that framework, we saw that there has been more focus on the development on the critical thinking side, the head side, as well as the heart side, rather than the hand side, right? So I think it does demonstrate that through the, you know, online learning, there are areas that actually is enhanced better than the other areas, right? So that was one of the, I guess, the outcome of moving towards online platform. And and that's, you know, answering the first question, the production of knowledge. And I think in terms of the challenges that that we found, I think it's more of challenges both for the students as well as for the academics, right, for the teachers. So in terms of the challenges, I think it was more on the online connection, as well as the time difference, I guess, because I mean, there is a 3-hour difference, and managing that time difference was really a challenge, I think, for most of us. You know, like now I'm in Australia and it's 5 in the morning. So it's a bit challenging, right? But anyway, I think what we learned really was while we moved into asynchronous, so meaning we were trying to pre-record and show, and this is talking about the situation here in Australia, where we were told by the administration to record our, you know, webinars and teaching, and we did that. Then it was shown to students, but we saw that the students really craved for, you know, synchronous socialization with their groups. And I think having that breakout rooms were really useful in the Zoom platform. But at the same time, secondly, was the collaborative platform that we use, like Mural, were really useful in order to kind of simulate that face-to-face workshop style in one room, in one table, moving into, you know, online space. And so I think, in summary, I guess the lessons that we learned is that we were, in a way, became more experimental. We became more resilient and, I think, agile to kind of suit the change that were required by the situation. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. We have another question also. Actually, it's a complex one, but just to simplify it, it is about the idea of hybrid learning. So most of us now are talking either or. It's physical or virtual. What about hybrid learning, and whether we're going to experience new types of physical spaces, maybe smaller than the existing ones? What's going to take place in terms of, if you could like speculate? And I would say this is to Hassam, so because he's an interior designer, so give us a little more on this, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Salama, for coordinating this session. It has been a pleasure to being among all these great educators. That's a great question, I think. And first of all, I would like to say I'm so optimistic about the future, because to me, we are learning our lessons from virtual learning, and we are learning ways that we can incorporate those lessons in the future, hopefully in physical environment. So the study that we conducted actually found that there are pros and cons for virtual learning. So that shows that there are lessons that we can learn from virtual learning. And I think definitely hybrid learning can be a solution for the future. So basically looking at the subject matter from different perspectives, like in architecture and interior design education, we have lecture courses versus activity-based courses or studios. So they require different approach for teaching. So virtual learning might be a good solution, and more to our virtual learning we can incorporate in lecture classes, but definitely studio classes require more attention. And even within the studio classes, we have to be very careful about what level of students we are talking about. Like from my personal experience, upper division studios, they require different basically attentions for their studios, and lower division students also, they have their own requirements. So one thing that I've noticed in my classes is, for instance, physical models and demonstration, it's a big challenge in lower division studios, because to me, there's no practical way to teach physical modeling in virtual learning, and it requires in-person meetings and interactions with the students. So that has been a big challenge for lower division, which I believe in the future there should be more innovative ways if we were to do virtual learning for that. But overall, I think these lessons will help us in the future, and hybrid learning definitely can help us to teach efficiently and more effectively in different levels of students for interior design architecture.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. There is one more question, and actually it's an open-ended discussion about the idea of mental health. We already know that there were many statistics before the pandemic that, especially in architecture and allied design disciplines, there is a mental health issue, and many students are experiencing basically mental breakdowns, and in the context of Europe as well as in other contexts. So what do you think the implication of the COVID and the condition it has created? I think we're not talking enough about mental health, but I would leave it to you also to tell us a little bit more if you feel we need to conduct research on mental health, or what was the mental health aspects related to your research. Okay, Ahmad, please. No, we can't hear you.
Sorry for that. This is the heart of our presentation and our interest, and I hope I will say something, and probably Dr. Imad would add to it. In the survey that we have conducted, we had like 8 parameters about creativity, motivation, all kinds of things that have been discussed in this session about like production of knowledge, being creative, and so on. The final one was about well-being and health, and students more or less were really very positive about everything. And I believe that online education, all in all, has improved the the process a lot. I mean, it has some disadvantage, but it has so many advantages. Except the well-being and health, they felt isolated. They felt they had like kind of psychological issues. They felt that they can't stay like that for so long. They felt that there are too much things to arrange. They have to go to Blackboard and online and watch it and keep watching it minute by minute and so on. And then the technical issues of each one in different countries. So they were not really satisfied with just in terms of the well-being and health. And this is beyond the control of us, the instructors. So in this semester, we have tried to develop ways to respond to that. For example, to increase visual communication. For me, in my classes, I urge students to turn on their videos. I didn't used to really stress this issue in the last semester, all to somehow bring students to some feeling of having like a physical environment. And I hope software can develop themselves in this direction. I mean, some softwares are not really designed to take care of this issue.
There is one more thing I just want to say, especially because in the case of Hassam and Bud, about first-year students and beginning students. So those are type of students that you haven't seen before. And then the pandemic happened. And then what do? It's like there is no prior experience with these students. I noticed that in the presentation of Bud, he talked about, softening the atmosphere through music, performances, and multiple learning opportunities. And these are excellent. But I was wondering if there are other mechanisms that we can utilize to reduce the level of anxiety and all of these issues.
So I'll just add one thing to that. I found that this issue of mental health, a lot of the students, like, I noticed it even before we got into online learning and everything else, just because it's such a taxing and difficult profession. But what I found was that a lot of the students, and maybe it was, we would have one-on-one meetings, which are really hard to have in the studio and physical studio, where they can really kind of open up to, to me, or, express how they're feeling. I found that actually most of my students were more comfortable talking with me online than not. And then the other thing I would add to Ahmad's comment, having everyone had to have their screen on, it helped the students see that, hey, someone else doesn't get it either, or someone else looks like they're about to fall asleep or cry or whatever. And I think that's really important. So they knew that they weren't alone in this, that other people are feeling the same way they are.
I would like to add a comment as well,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. So one thing that actually I've noticed about the students is they keep asking themselves these questions that, why do I study? Like, what's the future for me? And so one thing about their future, as they are concerned, because of the pandemic and the impact that it had on their job market, I think just being honest with the students and explaining the situation, because like the job market before the pandemic, at least in the United States, was pretty good, and it got impacted, and now we are not certain about the future, but just being honest with them about what are the opportunities for the future, and not basically stopping their effort, but putting more effort to be successful in the future. So that's one thing that I would like to highlight. And also one other thing that I noticed regarding mental health, since I'm teaching interior design studios, we know that physical environment has impact on their health. So I think these days in this pandemic era, we are seeing more attention to physical environment to make that impact, and just like highlighting the importance and informing students that there are more attentions toward physical environment. I think that make them even feel better about what they do in their major.
Very good. Edelina, please, one final comment from you.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. So that's really a good question, because what we found with our students is that there really was heightened emotions in terms of, what happened last year, wherein we were in hard lockdown in Melbourne. So a lot of reactions where they were really, asking questions, demanding so much from us academics. But at the same time, we also have safeguards, I guess, to support them. So I think one of the things that really helped was creating a community of, like through WhatsApp. So through WhatsApp, a community of students wherein they kind of shared their thoughts, ideas, or activities, etc. Another thing was having virtual coffee, book club, writing sessions that really were more of a social kind of gathering, but virtually. And I think what else? So there was also from the university a team mentoring process wherein 2 academics were meeting with 4 undergrad students, and these are mainly targeted for those new students coming in who had never had the opportunity to meet anyone else in person. So I think these were the strategies that were put in place to kind of address the issue of lack of socialization and COVID restrictions.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Please, Kathleen, thank you. Thanks to everyone for the wonderful session.